Good morning. Welcome to Carlisle Barracks and the United States Army War College's graduation ceremony honoring the distance education class of 2019. The music today is provided by the Carlisle Town Band under the direction of Dave Rohr. The Army War College is fortunate to have an extraordinary faculty consisting of military and civilian professionals. They are dedicated to educating and developing leaders for service at the strategic level while advancing knowledge in the global application of land power. Their excellence in teaching, scholarship, and service are reflected in the accomplishments of the graduating students, and they contribute to the enduring success of this institution. Leading the faculty procession is Dr. Jacqueline Whitt, Chair of the Faculty Council. Please give a warm welcome to the faculty of the Army War College as they move in procession to their seats. The band is currently playing the Carlyle March. This original composition was written by Dr. Gordon W. Bowie and dedicated to the Army War College. The official portion of our program today will begin with the playing of America the Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the official party and the playing of honors, then remain standing as Professor Bert Tussing sings our national anthem. This will be followed by the invocation. As a reminder, military personnel do not salute, but simply stand at attention during the playing of honors and the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glow, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Let us pray. Almighty God, today we thank you for 360 plus steadfast servants of their countries who have dedicated themselves to a long and significant educational endeavor on top of their civilian and military vocations. We praise them for their commitment these 2 years, and we celebrate today their successful completion. As these graduates receive their diplomas, let them also receive your calling to a new sense of purpose in their professions. Give them a vision for strategic and noble service as they go forth to employ the education that they've received here. Also, we greatly honor the steadfast support of their families, who selflessly sacrificed time, energy, and 1,000 other things to facilitate the success of their graduate and to make this day a reality. Bless them for their loving commitments. These things I pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please be seated. We would like to thank the Pennsylvania Army National Guard's 1st of the 108th Field Artillery for honoring our guest speaker with a 19-gun salute. We will now present awards for student research and writing and for faculty excellence, followed by academic promotion for several faculty members. The Army War College Student Awards Program recognizes outstanding student research, writing, and speaking on issues of importance to national security. The awards presented today are sponsored by the Army War College, by the Army War College Foundation, and by external organizations that encourage excellence in military scholarship. Presenting the awards are the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation, Colonel Retired Ruth Collins, the Dean, Dr. Richard Lacument, the Provost, Dr. James Breckenridge, the 51st Commandant of the Army War College, Major General John Kim, and the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, General Joseph Lengyel. Please hold your applause until all awards have been presented and the faculty promotions have been completed. The following student is being honored with the Commandant's Award for Distinction in Research. Lieutenant Colonel James K. Perrin, Jr. His project advisor was Professor Robert Hume. The following students are being honored with the War College Foundation's Award for Outstanding Strategy Research Paper. Colonel Robert S. Gleckler, project advisor, Dr. Joel Hillison. Colonel Joseph L. Liardi, project advisor, Colonel Jared Harper. The following student is being honored with the Reserve Officers Association Lieutenant General Thomas J. Pluis Reserve Component Research Award. Colonel Rex A. Eiserer, project advisor, Professor Frederick Gellert. To honor his leadership as the student class president, the War College Foundation presents a lifetime alumni membership to Colonel Warren R. Wood. 3 faculty members are receiving the Excellence in Teaching Award to honor their distinguished work with the graduating class of 2019. Colonel Peter M. Haas in first-year studies. Colonel Paul N. Drake IV in second-year studies. And Colonel Dennis N. Snelling in the electives program. We will now recognize faculty members who have earned promotion in academic rank. Academic rank recognizes not only past performance, but also future potential as a faculty member within the requirements of Army War College Regulation 690-12. The hierarchy of academic rank, from lowest to highest, is instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. Promotion requires meeting rigorous standards of excellence in teaching, scholarship, and service. The following faculty members in the Department of Distance Education are hereby promoted to the academic rank of Assistant Professor. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer I. Bauer, Lieutenant Colonel James V. DeCrocco III, Colonel James A. Frick, Colonel Jared I. Harper, Colonel Jeffrey A. McDougall, Colonel John A. Mauchin, Colonel Peter M. Haas, and Colonel Paul N. Drake IV. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for all our award winners and promotees. Ladies and gentlemen, the 51st Commandant of the United States Army War College, Major General John Kim.
Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day at Carlisle Barracks. I know it's a little warm out there, but way better than last Friday when it was 99 degrees at this time. A special welcome to all the friends and families of the class of 2019 that are already here today. Amazing accomplishments by all of you sitting out there, especially all the family, friends, and support it took to help you get through the last 2 years. As I told you 2 weeks ago, when you first arrived that Monday morning, this is the happiest graduation of the year because you all get some of your lives back in terms of time and energy But you also go out of here with a renewed foundation, an education that helps prepare you for all the important jobs you have coming. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I just want to say a few words to the graduating students. Really, on behalf of the faculty and staff, we're all very proud of you, and congratulations. As you know, the faculty and staff help you achieve this, but it's really about you, your classmates, and what you all bring to the table that causes the success here. 2 years ago, when you started this program, we challenged you to make the leap from the tactical and operational to the strategic. We asked you to become a true lifelong learner, to grow and develop into the strategic leader you need to be a better thinker, and prepare yourself for a different level of leadership. We told you that your previous success was all useful and valuable, but it wasn't sufficient, and you need to prepare for far more important and bigger roles. And you have absolutely done that. So it's now my pleasure to introduce General Lengyel, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Through his 38 years of service, he has commanded at numerous echelons, most notably as the Vice Commander of the 1st Air Force, the Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, before assuming his current position in 2016. Sir, thank you for being here today. We're thankful for your support and the direct impact you have had on the Army War College Distance Education Program and the Resident Program, and especially your contributions to help us achieve the increased Joint Professional Military Education qualifications for many of these officers. And you've done an amazing job at influencing future Air Force students to join this group. So thank you very much for that, and we're so proud to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, General Joseph Lengyel. Thank you.
Bear with me as I adjust my focal length here. Well, good morning, everyone. While I know I am happy to be here, I am nowhere near as happy as all of you that you are here. So, General Kim, thank you for that kind introduction, to your faculty and staff for the excellent hospitality. I want to extend my sincere thanks to all in attendance today, including State Adjutants General here, all other general officers present. Thank you to all the supporters, the family, the friends, the graduates here today, and of course my sincerest compliments and congratulations to the graduates of the United States Army War College class of 2019. It's great to be back here at the Army War College here at Carlisle, walking the same grounds with such great leaders and thinkers that have been here before us, such as Cretan Abrams and Alexander Haig and Norman Schwarzkopf. It was great. Secretary of War Elihu Root, who established this institution in 1901, not to promote war, but to preserve peace. He envisioned an institution that would become the catalyst for strategic ideas, for solve the great problems of national defense, about military science, and about responsible command. No doubt that noble tradition continues today here at Carlisle and through your course of instruction and development within the Department of Distant Education. The class of 2019 has come a long way since beginning this 2-year journey, one that added an immense amount of work to your already busy lives. I have no doubt your dedication to the program cost you many missed meals at home, kids' soccer games, dinners with friends and family and colleagues, as you scrambled to complete various readings, assignments, forums alike. Unlike your resident cohorts, we asked you to hold down a full-time job. You carved out time to complete this course. Some of you were deployed during portions of the course and still found a way to dedicate yourselves and develop yourselves and learn from peers scattered around the globe. We asked a lot from you, but it represents the faith your organization has in all of you, in your skills, in your personal dedication, and most of all, in your potential to develop as our next generation of strategic leaders. I want to express my appreciation for your hard work and sacrifice. I want to extend my sincerest thanks to the families who supported you through this challenging 2 years. I know that in that time you engaged in a wide range of topics focused on national security, and that as you dove deep into the relevant topics upon which you wrote papers and you discovered how to think strategically, your organizations will look to you to effectively communicate your understanding and vision and help set the strategic context of the global issues around us. I also trust you made lasting relationships and networks of strategically minded leaders and thinkers with whom you will continue to incubate the very ideas and concepts that will drive innovation and change into the future. It is through some of these relationships that you will produce some of your most meaningful work in the years ahead. Likewise, your colleagues will look to you for critical analysis, insight, and expert advice. Your nation is looking to you to lead its military in this ever-changing, complex, and competitive global security environment. After 18 years of armed conflict with violent extremist organizations, our nation is re-examining the demands of the security environment and reorienting our defense posture towards potential threats posed by peer adversaries. As great power competition brings with it emerging challenges to global security and stability, the joint force will be challenged to both respond to the here and now and to invest and modernize for full spectrum conflict in the future. Adapting to the 21st century security environment requires a significant and disciplined shift in how we do business. For while we are not newcomers to great power rivalry, the complexity of the competition space is far more challenging to navigate given the wide range of domains and functional areas that are now in play. Therefore, we must alter course to ensure we can compete successfully within a trans-regional, multi-domain, multifunctional environment. And should the time come, we must dominate the entire battle space across all domains. The wars of the last 2 decades have yielded fighting forces who are adaptive and agile, able to execute joint operational warfare anywhere in the world. We also continue our quest to rebuild and sustain the readiness for full-spectrum multi-domain conflict. You, the next generation of strategic leaders, must maintain that same operational proficiency for the here and now, while at the same time shifting and adapting big ideas to broader problems with higher stakes. In this era of great power competition, you will be required to think well beyond our typical near-term planning and programming cycle. You will need to anticipate how technology and innovation will evolve, and then, with speed and agility, harness its potential before our adversaries do. You will need to understand how all the levers of national power and influence must work together to achieve national objectives, and you must endeavor to synchronize them. Finally, you will need to become a true believer in the value of partnerships and guard those critical networks and alliances against unraveling, for this is truly our nation's greatest strategic advantage. Over the last 2 years, you've pored over the national security strategy and the national defense strategy. You've studied historical case studies and applied and derived lessons to contemporary security issues. You've seen how policy at the national level succeeds, and even more importantly, how it fails. When chance and opportunity collide and you find yourself at the table where policy decisions are being made, you will be ready. As strategic leaders, you will be given opportunity to change the organizations that you lead. Many of you will have the opportunity to affect national-level policymaking. You will be asked to provide your best military advice in critical situations. You will be front and center for some of the most pivotal strategic decisions of the next few decades. For many of you, this will come much faster than you think. For the National Guard and Reserve graduates, I want to implore you to fully understand and embrace the important role you play in the joint force, particularly since over half of the Army end strength resides in the National Guard and Reserves. Many of you will work in the Pentagon, the National Guard Bureau, Headquarters Army Reserve Command, Marine Forces Reserve, etc., and will be in positions to affect change at the national level for your organization. For those of you who return to states or territories, Joint Force Headquarters, your organizations will look to you to execute state missions while ensuring units remain ready for their federal role. And many of you are or soon will be brigade commanders or your service equivalent. Your troops will look to you to provide a vision for your organization that connects the dots from strategic objectives to tactical actions in a way that inspires them to be a meaningful part of something bigger, something in which they will invest their blood, sweat, tears, and maybe even their lives. In all these instances, your importance as a strategic leader is all too evident. As the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, I'm committed to ensuring that we are a rapidly accessible and scalable combat force to fight America's wars. This is our most fundamental responsibility and one that I take very seriously. I would especially challenge the officers within the Army and Air National Guard to read and understand the Guard's implementation guidance of our national defense strategy. As strategic leaders, we must adapt, and it's imperative you understand and can effectively articulate our role inside the global operating model. It drives our force posture and our very employment. You must be able to translate this concept into vision and a tangible way ahead for your organizations. I want to highlight a few areas within the implementation guidance that I think are important for any strategic leader in the current global environment, and certainly for those in the reserve component and National Guard. Over the last 20 years, we have led the transition into an operational reserve. This has changed us forever, and many of you were part of this evolution. First and foremost, we should be proud of what we've become: ready, capable, innovative warfighters. Within the National Defense Strategy, reservists and guardsmen field lethal combat formations that support service and combatant command requirements. We accomplish this through full integration across all layers of the global operating model. To this end, readiness is and will always be the foundation upon which our combat lethality is built. Because regardless of the character of the conflict or the strength of the adversary, we must be ready to fulfill our warfighting mission and dominate whenever and wherever we are called. As it is only through this posture of lethality and readiness we stand the best chance of deterring conflict in the first place. Of course, readiness depends more than anything upon the extraordinary men and women who comprise the force. Maintaining a skilled, professional, deployable force is paramount to readiness. Leaders must devote great time and energy to recruiting and retention, enabled by how we incentivize membership, how we as leaders provide both the inducements as well as the phenomenal opportunities that attract and retain this all-volunteer professional force. We must nurture character and discipline, develop leaders who instill integrity, inspire conviction, and create environments which equality, diversity, and opportunity can thrive. These attributes are essential to building and retaining the force. Readiness depends on force modernization and joint interoperability. We have worked hard over the last 2 decades to challenge the model of cascading old equipment into the reserve component formations, rendering forces that are no longer deployable, sustainable, or interoperable. This is a practice that diminishes the overall lethality of the total force. The challenge for the Guard and Reserve is to maintain integrated and interoperable with the active components, which often means adhering to timelines that outpace our resourcing and our funding. This will always represent a challenge for strategic leaders within the reserve components, and one that demands we adapt in ways that anticipate change, requirements, and harness the new and innovative processes. Our active component counterparts are vested in our success, but it takes proactive leadership to ensure we effectively integrate our readiness generation process within the demands of the global operations model. Along with our wartime missions, we maintain unique and specialized capabilities ready to support civilian authorities in the homeland and when emergency response when called upon. Through these capabilities, we connect on a very local level with the very communities that we live among and that support us. In many ways, the men and women of the National Guard and the Reserves represent not only the quintessential citizen soldier, but that local human connection between the American people and their military. I know all of you can appreciate the value of partnerships, whether across the interagency, with industry, or with international partners and allies. We work with international, interagency, and industry partnerships here at home to secure peace and security in the homeland. Together, we forge and maintain enduring global partnerships as well, directly enhancing U.S. friends and access and basing critical for ensuring our interests abroad. Our vast network of partners and allies represents one of our nation's greatest strengths. As such, understanding how to ensure your organization remains an effective partner is critical to building and maintaining enduring partnerships. Your success as a strategic leader will depend in large part on how you maintain professional networks and accomplish things as part of a collaboration, especially in this hyper-connected global environment. Strategic leaders must serve as good stewards of our resources. As such, it's imperative we all look to ways to improve efficiencies and reduce costs. We must look to achieve this through innovation, functional alignment, and budget discipline while realizing cost savings for the American taxpayer. We must all look in the mirror. Change begins with each one of us. If your organization must undergo a change, whether due to functional realignment or consolidation, you must embrace it. You must drive it. Change can be one of the hardest things we do, and it can be a difficult road for those that we lead, but you must not hold change hostage to buy-in or consensus. So communicate the goodness that will result and reassure your force that you are dedicated to the successful transition and move out and be a transformational leader. While you must be ready to make the hard choices change requires, you must empower your people and endow them with your trust to solve big problems. Harness the innovative spirit that lives within your ranks and incentivize those who dare to try by underwriting their risk in a way that propels bold ideas to evolve into game-changing solutions and opportunities. So in conclusion, I would like to congratulate you on this noteworthy achievement and an important milestone in all of your careers. You have been thoroughly tested and found completely worthy of the distinction of graduate of the United States Army War College. As I get closer to the end of my tenure in service, I am inspired by all of you. We are the greatest military force the world has ever seen, and our competitors watch us, they learn from us, they emulate us, they copy us, all for a reason. We are simply the best. History is replete with great militaries that have been relegated to the graveyard of complacency. We must continue to innovate and adapt. We are a nation of risk takers. We thrive on competition. It's in our DNA, and it's what has made us great. As our extraordinary history pays ample testimony, no one should ever underestimate the grit and the resolve of the American people. Guided by our values, propelled by our spirit, and inspired by the courage of preceding generations, we, the leaders of our great military, represent a proud tradition, the pride of our nation, for which we carry the torch. Lit by our founders and burning as brightly today as ever before, you must guard it diligently, deliver it safely into the hands of the next generation of leaders to follow you, so that our legacy, just as our nation, will endure and continue to thrive. I have full faith and confidence in all of you and all of your abilities. I wish you the very best. I know that you will make this institution, our military, and our nation very proud. I wish you the best of luck. May God bless you all. May God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Major General Kim and the Army War College are pleased to confer upon General Joseph Lengyel the honorary degree of Master of Letters, Strategic Studies, honoris causa, together with all honors, rights, and privileges pertaining thereto, given at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, this 26th day of July, 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, class of 2019 diplomas are conferred under the authority of the United States Congress. In recognition of their accomplishments, the graduates will receive the diploma of the United States Army War College, and if earned, the degree of Master of Strategic Studies. Graduates will be presented their diploma by Dr. Lacument, Dr. Breckenridge, Major General Kim, and General Lengyel. Please hold your applause until all degrees and diplomas have been presented.
Seminar 1, Colonel James G. Riley. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon I. Barksdale. Lieutenant Colonel Michael J. Biardi. Commander Peter George Brereton. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey D. Cabana. Lieutenant Colonel Jason A. Filos. Lieutenant Colonel Eric R. Gollin. Colonel Michael G. Kaufman, Colonel Eric J. Leckel, Lieutenant Colonel Nick G. McCrease, Colonel Michael J. Malone, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah E. McGrath, Colonel Jose David Rivera, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley James Sams, Lieutenant Colonel Tanya E. Simmons, Colonel Jerry L. Tolbert, Lieutenant Colonel David W. Walker, Lieutenant Colonel John M. Wheeler. Seminar 2, Lieutenant Colonel James A. Ewing, Colonel Brent W. Allen, Colonel David S. Allen, Dr. Liston W. Bailey, Jr., Colonel Ryan W. Barnes, Colonel Stephen M. Bousquet, Colonel Mark C. Carter, Lieutenant Colonel Douglas T. Frank, Colonel Tamara S. Funry, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth C. Gilliland, Colonel Jeffrey Craig Kearns, Mr. Bradley J. Olson, Chaplain Colonel Charles A. Phillips, Lieutenant Colonel David L. Pickle, Jr., Colonel Neil Tho, Lieutenant Colonel Lindy Inyong White, Mr. William D. Zagraki. Seminar 3, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Charles Callahan, Mr. Michael E. Apodaca, Lieutenant Colonel Alvin Aponte, Lieutenant Colonel Brian E. Bart, Mr. Lane A. Bodian, Lieutenant Colonel Marco A. Bonjani, Colonel John Bradley Bolin, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Collins, Colonel Alex A.K., Dr. Karen J. Finkenbinder, Colonel Bobby M. Ginn, Lieutenant Colonel Sean T. Hubble, Lieutenant Colonel Jason W. Ketwig, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher R. Pyland, Lieutenant Colonel Leonard J. Poirier, Colonel Gita R. Velu. Seminar 4, Colonel Richard M. Sutter II, Colonel Bettina K. Avent, Lieutenant Colonel Michael A. Avolio, Colonel Peter R. Barajas, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher A. Blanco, Colonel Christopher J. Bazard, Colonel Gregory C. Glasso, Colonel Paul C. Gravely, Ms. Lisa G. Hamlin, Colonel Marion A. Jefferson, Mr. Noah B. Crystal, Lieutenant Colonel Corey M. Newcomb, Lieutenant Colonel David M. Newman, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph J. Sharkey, Colonel Christopher M. Sullivan, Colonel Lauren J. Thompson, Mr. Eric S. Winterhalter. Seminar 5, Colonel Paul S. Peters, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Wayne Anderson, Colonel Mark C. Boone, Colonel Gabriel A. Chinchilla, Lieutenant Colonel Brett D. Compston, Colonel Kelly M. Dickerson, Colonel Lance R. Duhlman, Lieutenant Colonel Cesar Gonzalez, Lieutenant Colonel Kimberly Ann Hayworth, Lieutenant Colonel Babu Kaza, Commander James P. McDonald, Colonel Benjamin W. Malminger, Lieutenant Colonel Courtney T. Ray, Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas M. Sanchez, Colonel Jeffrey S. Settle, Colonel Earl C. Sparks IV, Colonel James R. Thompson, Lieutenant Colonel Brandy L. Williams, Lieutenant Colonel Shanae Zoe, Seminar 6, Lieutenant Colonel Timothy R. Stark, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne H. Chan, Lieutenant Colonel George T. Christensen, Dr. Peter Craig, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey M. Crane, Mr. Juan C. Fernandez, Colonel Gail A. Fisher, Lieutenant Colonel Wendy L. Gray, Lieutenant Colonel Andreas Boto Peschelschwert, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher M. Johnson, Mr. Christopher C. Line, Colonel Jason Paul Mafus, Lieutenant Colonel Craig A. Norton, Colonel Christopher M. Todd, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel J. Walsh. Seminar 7, Lieutenant Colonel Jocelyn S. Urgis, Colonel Joseph A. Asher, Lieutenant Colonel Michael R. Bean, Colonel Edwin C. Cox, Mr. Joseph N. Kurtzinger, Lieutenant Colonel Kurt J. Sear, Colonel Christina J. Green, Lieutenant Colonel Eugene Ham, Lieutenant Colonel Brett D. Jones, Colonel Michael J. Leisman, Chaplain Colonel Paul L. Miner, Colonel Jack Maxwell Machalo III, Colonel Jean-Paul Plamondon, Colonel Kent M. Porter, Mr. Seth Hilton Vaughn, Colonel William H. Wagner. Seminar 8, Colonel Jill J. Henderson, Colonel Christine C. Borgognoni, Mr. Richard Aaron Chandler, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey J. Clements, Colonel John G. Drakeford, Colonel Jason E. Garcia, Colonel Aaron J. Justice, Mr. James E. Keneally, Colonel Gerald T. Caucci, Colonel Michael A. Ladd, Lieutenant Colonel Leon M. Lapointe, Lieutenant Colonel William B. Long, Sr., Lieutenant Colonel Scott Pepin, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth J. Ratliff, Colonel Matthew Thomas Cilia, Lieutenant Colonel William J. Smith, Jr. Seminar 9, Lieutenant Colonel Rhonda B. White, Colonel Mark P. Diedrich, Mr. David J. Drinkard, Lieutenant Colonel Aaron P. Harding, Lieutenant Colonel Carrie L. Harriman, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick D. Howard, Chaplain Colonel Paul R. Jedicke, Colonel Martin R. Juarez, Colonel Gerald J. Krieger, Lieutenant Colonel Joel F. Lynch, Colonel Christopher S. McKee, Lieutenant Colonel Patrick A. Reese, Lieutenant Colonel Alan L. Simpkins, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond J. Stemmitz, Colonel Paul D. Thiessen, Mr. Ryan M. White, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph E. Yon, Seminar 10, Lieutenant Colonel Mark E. Pickett, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth T. Bailey, Lieutenant Colonel Carolyn J. Carden, Lieutenant Colonel Michael J. Diaz, Mr. Bradley Scott Duckworth, Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Gregg, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Evan Kalin, Mr. Brian E. Kreswinski, Colonel Paul L. Kettner, Lieutenant Colonel Clifton C. Kyle, Colonel Joseph L. Liardi, Colonel Sandra K. Martin, Lieutenant Colonel Julian R. Nierva, Lieutenant Colonel Mark P. O'Neill, Jr., Colonel Douglas A. Vanderhoof, Lieutenant Colonel Robert W. Walker, Jr., Colonel James E. Seminar 11, Colonel Jan Matthew Oline, Lieutenant Colonel Sean P. Begley, Mr. Antoine Cheatham, Lieutenant Colonel Sean G. Delaney, Lieutenant Colonel John D. Farr, Colonel Tara L. Hall, Colonel Richard J. Harrison, Jr., Lieutenant Colonel Everett R. Hawk II, Colonel Frederick Allen Hockett, Jr., Mr. Neil Clark Lanzendorf III, Lieutenant Colonel Chris M. Mabus, Colonel Rhonda R. McCulley, Lieutenant Colonel Step E. Knowlton, Lieutenant Colonel Randy N. Remiker, Colonel Royce P. Rososo, Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel William Harold Scritchfield, Lieutenant Colonel J. G. Sullivan. Seminar 12, Lieutenant Colonel Janine Michelle Smith, Lieutenant Colonel Jason P. Benson, Colonel Marcel P. Boos, Mr. John R. Dunleavy, Lieutenant Colonel Michael J. Eastridge, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew R. James, Dr. Raymond A. Millen, Lieutenant Colonel David S. Nash, Colonel Ginger K. Norris, Colonel David A. Okimoto, Colonel Lyle A. Arata, Colonel Patrick D. Party, Lieutenant Colonel Seth Peterson, Lieutenant Colonel Ansel M. Tyndall II, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey P. Wynn. Seminar 13, Lieutenant Colonel Patrick G. Clear, Colonel Todd M. Bookless, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Detling, Lieutenant Colonel Lucinda Duncan, Mr. Scott A. Eder, Mr. Christopher J. Gunning, Lieutenant Colonel Seth T. Heibel, Colonel Michael R. LaFontaine, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony M. Leva, Lieutenant Colonel John S. McDonald, Colonel Darrell S. McCormick, Colonel Scott N. Parker, Colonel Tanya A. Peacock, Lieutenant Colonel Katie S. Pierce, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph M. Reese, Colonel Mac Walker, Colonel Stephen E. Walker. Seminar 14. Lieutenant Colonel Shane P. Strickland. Lieutenant Colonel Joy L. Alexander. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen M. Davenport. Lieutenant Colonel Matthew O. Denena, Sr. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Daniel DePaula. Mr. Curtis R. Evans, Jr. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey A. Fiddler. Lieutenant Colonel Edward A. McGoldrick. Colonel Aaron C. Pitney. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond J. Ripberger. Lieutenant Colonel Jess E. Ulrich. Colonel Brenda L. Vervoort. Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Webb, Jr. Lieutenant Colonel Shay D. Whitey. Lieutenant Colonel William A. Wigham. Mr. Scott A. Woodson. Seminar 15. Colonel E. Lee Bryan, Jr. Lieutenant Colonel Timothy C. Baldwin. Graduating in absentia, Colonel Sean T. Boyette. Lieutenant Colonel Regina D. Caruso. Lieutenant Colonel Edward T. Downey. Colonel Dirk D. Erickson. Lieutenant Colonel Charles N. Floyd. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley E. Franklin. Mr. John H. Gimble. Colonel Katrina Elaine Lloyd. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel D. Mahaffey. Lieutenant Colonel Peter J. Mailing. Colonel Robert W. Metcalf. Lieutenant Colonel Philip D. Robinson. Lieutenant Colonel Frank L. Witzberger. Seminar 16. Lieutenant Colonel John V. Wilderman. Lieutenant Colonel John Frederick Barrett. Lieutenant Colonel Luke T. Bentz. Lieutenant Colonel Marion A. Bullwinkle III. Lieutenant Colonel Kathleen A. Eakin. Lieutenant Colonel Jackie R. East. Lieutenant Colonel Randy Joel Erickson. Lieutenant Colonel Eric R. Freebus. Colonel Robert A. Gleckler. Mr. Aaron D. Goodman. Colonel Lisa Jenny Howe. Lieutenant Colonel James Allen Martin. Lieutenant Colonel Michael J. Moffett. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick H. Morgan. Mr. Stephen Bradley Ramus. Colonel Paul W. Rogers. Colonel David A. Sparacio. Seminar 17. Colonel Jeffrey Douglas Wood. Colonel Stephen A. Beatty. Colonel Christina L. Burton. Colonel Marion Cedric Carrington. Colonel James R. Fiddler. Lieutenant Colonel Frederick P. Galoon. Lieutenant Colonel Andreas Grahauskas. Dr. Timothy Von Hoyt. Graduating in absentia, Lieutenant Colonel Stacy Ann L. Cato. Lieutenant Colonel Heath M. Lewis. Mr. Daniel W. Upstall. Lieutenant Colonel Roderick Christopher Patrick. Lieutenant Colonel Rusty G. Rhodes. Lieutenant Colonel Gregory W. Rogers. Lieutenant Colonel Chad E. Stone. Colonel Greg S. Wickland. Colonel Carl A. Young. Seminar 18. Colonel Christopher B. Riley. Colonel Brent R. Baxter. Colonel Casey C. Brashear. Colonel Ronald L. Burke. Lieutenant Colonel Betty S. Comiskey. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel W. Eckerson. Dr. Donald Edward Hall. Lieutenant Colonel Gregory S. Jackals. Colonel John W. Lee. Lieutenant Colonel Gregory A. Marchand. Colonel Robert L. Penn II. Colonel Stephen Perry. Colonel Michael T. Slack. Mr. Clayton Andrew Smith, Colonel Matthew Dean Stubbs, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Evan Templeton, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew W. Twombly, Lieutenant Colonel Sean D. Ray. Seminar 19, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey S. Corella, Chaplain Colonel Stephen Cantrell, Lieutenant Colonel Alan D. Cheek, Colonel Harvey A. Cutchin, Colonel William Francis Earhart, Lieutenant Colonel Peter E. Fiorentino, Mr. Armando Hernandez, Colonel Glenn A. Layton, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher J. Martindale, Colonel Hugh A. McLean, Jr., Lieutenant Colonel Mercedes Murillo, Colonel James F. Porter, Lieutenant Colonel Scott J. Roeder, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Sean Shanley, Colonel John Stanley, Colonel Dana J. Turanjo. Seminar 20, Colonel Julianne M. Lefevre, Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Joseph Christ, Colonel Rex A. Iserer, Lieutenant Colonel Noland I. Flores, Mr. John R. Herzog, Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy T. Lingenfelser, Colonel Alexander V. McLemore, Colonel Michael A. Pelsner, Colonel Reginald T. Richardson, Lieutenant Colonel Chris W. Schwindeman, Lieutenant Colonel Eric E. Smith, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel A. Still, Colonel Michael A. Stinnett, Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Toro, Dr. Russell R. Vane III, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer N. Williams. Seminar 21, Chaplain Colonel Robert J. Glazner, Colonel Jeffrey J. Abramus, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks D. Braden, Lieutenant Colonel Michael G. Carter, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin P. Crawford, Lieutenant Colonel Obun J. Duffy, Colonel Walter R. Gill, Captain Lisa Maloney Gittleman, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen G. Kettle, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph J. Ledbetter, Colonel Garth P. Massey, Colonel William S. Mitchell, Colonel August T. Murray, Lieutenant Colonel Mark A. Orrick, Lieutenant Colonel Kurt C. Owens, Lieutenant Colonel Terry A. Saul, Colonel John A. Stokes, Jr., Colonel Warren Ray Wood. Seminar 22, Lieutenant Colonel Barry W. Groton, Jr., Colonel Michael James Allen, Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Burton, Colonel Charles Derrick Campbell, Lieutenant Colonel John Mitchell Douglas, Colonel Edgar R. Huguetta, Lieutenant Colonel Adam M. King, Lieutenant Colonel Douglas A. Ludwig, Colonel William F. McClintock, Lieutenant Colonel Eve M. McLeod, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew N. McConnell, Colonel Murray B. McCulloch, Lieutenant Colonel James K. Perrin, Jr., Colonel Matt F. Riesenberg, Lieutenant Colonel Brian J. Slaughter, Commander Gretchen L. Woodard, Lieutenant Colonel Carl Young II.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating the graduates of the United States Army War College class of 2019. Thank you.